Spacefarer. What the UFO? I'm here with Karin Austin. Karin, thank you so much for joining me. Great to see you today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. For anyone who might not know, Karin is the executive director of the John Mack Institute and the director of the Center for the Impossible at Rice University, which is a fantastic new organization that she has been instrumental in leading the development of. And we're going to talk heavily about that today. She also comes from a background of direct experience in this subject. Again, if you're familiar with the topic, you're probably aware that Karin is an abduction experiencer and she worked directly with John Mack. We're not going to focus on experience stuff today, but if anybody is interested in learning more about Karin's story, they can read Passport to the Cosmos, which is the second of the two John Mack books about experiences with unknown beings. And I would recommend it because it's a really good read anyway. And I also just wanted to say, by one more way of preamble, that I am extremely grateful for Karin, for you sharing your time with me today. I consider you a master of this subject, obviously by virtue of your direct experience, but also by virtue of the leadership and intellectual courage and rigor and curiosity that you're bringing to it. So I'm extremely grateful for you sharing some of your precious time with me. And I would like you to consider me approaching this as a student who is excited to learn from you and hear about your wisdom, as opposed to an interrogator. I am certainly not a journalist. I would just love to have a conversation and benefit from your experience. So thank you so much for making time. And I'd love to start, I guess, by asking about how you got into this subject. We can talk a little bit about what it was like to work with John, if that feels like a good way into you. And then we'll get to what's going on at the Archives of the Impossible and talk about some details of that.
Sure. Thank you. That's very heartwarming. It makes me blush a little bit. But it's really, we're all students in this, right? You know, I've never stopped feeling like a student myself. And it's one of those things that the more we learn about it, the more we realize we don't know about it. You know, so welcome to the party, I suppose. I could say. I think a lot of people, or at least some people, certainly in our community, know about my backgrounds and know that I'm affiliated with both organizations. So when I hear, the title of executive director of the John Mack Institute, for me, what comes up is right now, I just feel like one of the lighthouse keepers. You know, we're trying to create a space for what's emerging, what wants to emerge, within the organization. And I've certainly learned over the course of the past number of years that it feels to me and others who are associated behind the scenes with the John Mack Institute that really what needs the new identity of the John Mack Institute needs to be really experiencer focused, right? Because that's what John was focused on. And, it's just in the DNA of this organization to be an advocate, to serve as an advocate organization for a very much underrepresented, community in the mainstream cultural dialogue. So I think keep an eye on us over the course of the next couple of years. And I think, people will begin to get a sense of what the, John Mack Institute sort of 2.0 looks like. And and working, I found my way here through a series of completely unforeseeable events. I started working with John in the late 90s, to process the abduction encounters I was experiencing at the time. And I participated in his research for, we're all the way at the end there until he brought it to a close. And then over the course of time, our relationship evolved. It became more like friends. And then that evolved into a personal assistant role in his life, which found me in his home at the unfortunate timing of his unexpected death. And that put me in relationship with his family in the closing of his estate, and put me in relationship with a basement full of filing cabinets of decades worth of, archives. And So it was with Will Boucher at the at the office, and with Pat's longtime administrative assistant, with John's longtime administrative assistant Pat, that we pulled all of his archives together. It was some 350 bankers boxes in total, which is insane. And some of them are like 1,000 documents in them. I mean, very, very dense. The man was
Whoa.
nothing, not prolific. We put all of that into deep storage, and there it sat until effectively COVID. And I got derailed off of the life path professional path that I was on, as did many people, and found myself resituated and realigned back with this work. I was inspired to reach out to Danny Mack with an idea. He said, "Yep, that sounds great." And between Will, myself, and Danny, we just kind of took stock of what needed to be completed from the past, and resolving, finding a long-term home for John's materials, both pre, his timing or his work in with abductees, and then post. Originally, Harvard University wanted all of it, but then that meant that they got the copyright and they were free to suppress any information that they wanted to. And not that they necessarily would have, it just left us with no control at all over any of the records, associated with the Harvard investigation, or frankly, it would have put all of the research materials related to abductees in the hands of individuals who just knew nothing about the subject matter. So it was fairly synchronistic, I suppose, that Jeff Kripal had been, developing a relationship with Danny Mack over a period of a few years. And so there was just kind of this alignment as I came onto the scene, in terms of like, all right, how do we resolve the archives, distribution? And it just seemed to make sense fairly quickly that Harvard should get everything that was in John's life up to the moment of his taking on the research of the phenomenon, and then everything from that period forward. So effectively the last 10 plus years of his life is now sitting in Rice University, and what has become the Center for the Impossible, because it's just growing and growing and growing. So I came here in the States in January of 2023, thinking that I was here for a month just to help process the archives, and then going to zip back home to live in Norway, where I'm supposed to be with my husband. And it has literally been almost 3 years exactly that I have not been back home yet. There's no end in sight. I don't know how the road curves. I mean, it's just straight for as long as I can see. And it just feels like there's more and more and more that's incoming to us every day. And so it feels like the beginning of a movement here, not like, oh, this was a project that's going to be laced up and tied off here shortly. It's like something profound is happening, and, we're just doing our best to keep up with it all. And, we have conversations regularly behind the scenes at Center for the Impossible, that just, it's that adage of, we're flying the plane as we're building it, so and as anybody who's tried to reach out can attest, my inbox is a constant source of personal shame, and it's not intentional. I do understand that, prompt communications are, essential and important. And, but it's very, very similar for both Jeff and Amanda Foki that we work with. It's just the sheer volume is kind of, unmanageable at some point. So we do have new help who's coming in. We've got fantastic research assistants that have been hanging with us from the beginning. Kimberly Ingalls, who's very inspired about this work, and Charles Yokoyama, who's a natural sciences neuroscientist who's got a lot to offer this work. We've got Michael Kelly as a researcher, and Jackie Klotz, who has just come in and kind of just sweeping in and taking over our operations. And we have Karin Young, who's been with us for a long time as a researcher, and there's Bonita as another researcher assistant. We've got this, team of folks who are, really trying to make it all happen. And it's, we still need more and more people. And, we're fundraising for that right now to cover our operations, budget and, and establish endowments for the future. So we can hand off the baton to the next generation at some point. We hope that and intend for this not to be finished when it's time for us to retire, if there is such a thing.
Yeah.
So
this is extremely cool and important
great
work. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, it's probably helpful for people to understand why, Center for the Impossible instead of Archives of the Impossible, like what happened there. So
I was just going to ask, is this a rebrand or is Archives part of the center?
It's a bifurcation. So just to be clear, so Archives of the Impossible was always Jeff Kripal's intellectual property. So Archives of the Impossible as a tax entity is an LLC.
Okay.
And it became clear as there are increasing opportunities to participate in media events that Jeff needed to just be able to have control over his own IP and copyrights, to do with as he needs to. So the bifurcation is that. So Archives of the Impossible is Jeff's IP, and Center for the Impossible is everything that Archives was before. So that means the actual physical and digital archives. It's the metadata project, and what's the other thing that we do? My brain is so tired.
Well, we're going to get
the conference.
into it. Oh,
it's
right.
The conference. Yeah. So it's those three things. So Center for the Impossible and Archives of the Impossible they still have connective tissue, between them. They're cousins or siblings, whatever you want to say it. And we'll still have that same Owlman branding that everybody recognizes. So it will feel both familiar and kind of new at the same time. So.
Okay, cool. So now let's move into our main course discussion of the Center for the Impossible. My understanding was that these archives started actually with a collection from Jacques Vallée, and then Whitley Strieber's papers started entering the picture. And then you brought the Mack files to the table. And when we spoke before, you mentioned that you were interested in continuing to expand this collection into some other researchers, and that you see this work as probably continuing for several years in an expansion way. And also that you mentioned there's a team member who has been encouraging you to start bringing in born digital materials, stuff that has existed on the internet. People have been reporting. So I'd love for you to give us a general sense to start here of the shape of the project. And then I'd love to talk about the discoveries that you've made along the way in terms of like how it works and like what the structure wants to be.
Yeah, sure. So the Jacques Vallée was the spark of all of this, in a conversation that he and Jeff had. Jeff tells that story best, so I won't try to do it any better than he can. But yes, it began with Jacques looking for a safe place to house his legacy materials that, would, secure them from any possibility of external interference or what's the word I'm thinking of? Just protected them within the university space. And from there, I don't know the exact order of things. I haven't committed that to memory, but yes, Ed May came in. We have Dick Haynes materials in. We have Whitley Strieber's beautiful letters that are there. They tell such an amazing story, both in written word and in so many provocative drawings that people made as they were trying to describe this is what happened. This is what these beings look like. So there's a lot of rich material in the Whitley letters, especially the John Mack materials are, similarly rich in letters that people wrote to John that were similar to the kind of letters that people wrote to Whitley. The metadata project itself was inspired in no small part by the public's interest in understanding John Mack's research materials, meaning, that's experience or session transcripts, which as a condition of donation had an 80-year withhold on them starting from the day of the document's creation. In no small part, I was a part of helping establish that guideline because as someone whose materials are in in those materials. My box is in there. I didn't want, that just out there with my name on it so everybody, could pick it apart. So I feel very strongly about protecting all of the experiencers who were in there who I know would feel similarly. Those are our most private, experiences that were occurring during an extremely provocative and upended period of our lives, which meant that all aspects of our lives are reflected in those dialogues. So, not just the encounters themselves, but how those encounters affected our personal relationships, our our families, our work relationships. Some of us, including myself, just kind of felt like we were in a washing machine at the time. Like I didn't know how to plug in or where to plug into my life, because whatever my life had been up until that moment suddenly just didn't fit anymore. And that's representative for many people who have gone through these encounters. So, but to understanding how quickly the disclosure conversation is moving in official channels, the around UAP and nuts and bolts, conversations, as everybody that's interested in the subject is aware of at this point. It's a narrative about national security and aviation safety, both of which are very important, but those narratives left unbalanced with the humanities, the human side of this conversation results in an incomplete understanding of what's actually occurring. So, the experiencer narratives with John, that lie in those research files are important to access. We need to understand, so we can really grok what the most repeated narrative points are. We need to understand the data that's in those materials. So it became clear that not only to get access to those in an ethical way, but to also ethically access other databases that we have in the archives, that we needed to create a metadata project that specifically focused on the digitization and anonymization of these materials in a way that, particularly around materials that we are treating as with respect and HIPAA compliance, that we're wanting to protect them over to the side, but also, again, understand what they are. So how we're establishing the methods by which we lift that data in a way that nobody ever sees what it was about. So data without people attached to it. And that's the process that we're in right now in the metadata project. And, to speaking about the long-term, vision of it, we continually several times a year have people, researchers knock on our door asking about opportunities to either collaborate or, potentially donate their research materials to us as well. So over the course of time, I think we're going to end up well beyond just the pilot study collections that we're working with right now, which is the Whitley Strieber and the John Mack materials. I think beyond that, we hope to have, as many of the core researchers who were investigating the abduction phenomenon at the end of the 20th century. We want those, we would like to have access at least to the digitized materials so we can study not just the data, the qualitative and the quantitative data itself, but also the epistemological differences, between each one of these researchers, because they approached it in different ways, had different biases, et cetera. And all of those differences affect how we understand, how humankind, our community understands what this phenomenon is. So there's a lot of incomplete parsing out and just workshop work that needs to be done, around the research that I think completed a chapter at the end of the 20th century, but has yet to be fully processed. So we're trying to do that to the best of our ability. Long-winded answer, I know.
No, well, this is fascinating stuff, and it seems like extremely important work. I really like your point about handing the torch off to future generations. Like, you're building an institution here that's going to potentially play a major role in helping us understand what we already know, helping us process all the information that has been anecdotal, basically, so far into actual data that people can interact with scientifically is like an enormously exciting project. And it also seems extremely difficult, to your point about the epistemological differences. And also everybody who reports is going to talk in slightly different ways. And I would imagine that's extremely challenging. So just to get my head around it again, I want to repeat what you said about the structure of the Institute, which is that, as I understand it, there's this metadata project, there's like a core archive project, and there's a conference project where you meet with people who are doing research in this field and you host them to talk about these subjects. Do I have that basically right? That's the tripartite structure?
Yeah, you got it. The conference is the conference thought. I think we've had 3 of them now. So that's open to the community. We, can host about 300-ish people, live. We'll continue to have them. I think we're going to be in a biannual rhythm with it. So our next one is Art of the Impossible in 2027, which should be fun. I'm hoping we have a kind of like Burning Man vibe to it or something. Not quite that
that'd be fun.
Obviously. So whatever the Burning Man light version of it is, just something that's creative and, engaging. So yes, there's the conference. And then there's the ongoing acquisitions of physical and digital archives and our efforts to make them available to the public in an ethical way. So we're establishing that infrastructure. And then, yes, what's the other thing? The metadata
project. Yeah. So
that's what the center is. Yeah.
Okay. And the center is basically extracting from these archive files the non-personal information to the extent that you can. I would love to talk to you now about what that process has been like, what you've learned along the way. What kind of structures are you working with? Like, are we talking about one like huge spreadsheet, or do you have like multiple databases within this thing?
We're going to geek out for a minute. This is where everybody, this is a good time to get up and go get a snack and come back.
I think people are probably interested in the actual brass tacks of it. At least I am, from a nerding perspective.
Okay. All right. So we'll get nerdy for a minute. That I think the biggest challenge we had was the black box, issue at the beginning, which, we didn't know what we didn't know. And we understood that we wanted to do an AI project. But if you think about where AI was 2 years ago versus where it is now and where it will be in another 6 months, I mean, it's this nascent, but as we all know, rapidly evolving, technology and how we oriented to how we imagined we might use AI at the beginning is evolving along with, the technology as it evolves. So it turns out it's a pretty straightforward, once the black box is unpacked, it's a pretty straightforward process. There's digitization that has to happen of the original materials because, to your earlier point, all of the archival materials we're working with are not born digital. These are a lot of them handwritten letters. Some of them from the late 90s are typed as more people started to get PCs. But there's a huge digitization heavy lift, especially for the Strieber and the John Mack files that we have to do to begin with. So digitization is complete on all of that. Then the next thing that we have to do is correct those transcriptions. So we had to identify a transcribing software that worked for us. We tried Transcribus first. It was correct to 95%, but 5% inaccuracy over, 35,000, 40,000 documents is extremely time consuming. It's untenable. That's not good enough. And we got lucky. One of our team members, Elliot, found a new transcribing software that handwriting OCR, which gets us to within 1% accuracy, which is a breakthrough. I mean, we're really geeking out here, but if anybody wants to know a very effective handwriting transcribing service, that's the one. And it still requires human supervision, though, right? So it's because it's not perfect. We have to have research assistants go through line by line and make sure that we are word for word capturing everything as the experiencer wrote about it. So we are actively in that role. I would say that we are probably about 1/3 to halfway done with it, I think, at this point. So
with the digitization?
No, the digitization's complete with the transcribing corrections. That's
okay.
we're making solid progress on that, and we're
Wow.
actively now then working on figuring out our computing environment and what kind of LLM we are going to use to work with these materials. Because what the next process that has to occur is coding, which is looking at line by line what each what each sentence says and what is the context for each sentence. Because if we're not careful, narrative flattening occurs. If a AI looks at a sentence and just says, well, this is the being that was in it, and this is how many people they saw in it, and they pull out the qualitative data, but don't notice the emotional affect of the individual, what words were used to describe how the individual experienced that, there's a huge narrative that gets lost in that process. So it's critical for us, and we thought to begin with that we were probably going to have human beings go through every single document line by line to make our own subjective assessments about what the mood that somebody was in. Were they terrified by what was happening? Were they inspired by it? Was it spiritual? Like what was the vibe? And because the latest LLMs are getting so intelligent at this point, we've done a few tests on GPT-5 most recently, just with a couple of documents. And the breakthrough is profound. It can grab all of the quantitative data, all of the qualitative data. It understands the context of what the individual was feeling, what that meant for them, what's implied by it. So all of this really intense heavy lifting that we thought we were going to have to do for years and years and years has been mitigated by the new competencies of this latest generation of AI. So all we have to do is keep watching the clock and wait for the next iteration to come out, and we're going to see improvements there as well. So that's a breakthrough. Understanding that what we'll be doing with AI is going to look very much like what we were doing with the transcription, which is really just having humans supervise, making sure we agree with the assessment. It will go much, much, much faster than what we were thinking before. So we're happy about that. And at the moment, we are, like I said, working on getting the computing environment just right, because obviously we can't be giving everybody's materials to, OpenAI. That's not a solution. So we have to create the privacy and the security that we need to do this work again in an ethical manner. So that's our current focus. And once we have that resolved, which literally we're in the middle of, we'll get that process moving like a locomotive, I think. And then we'll be looking at how to anonymize the materials, which I think, again, AI is going to help us with a lot because it can recognize the street names, et cetera. So we just need to figure out how those redactions are going to work. And as we anonymize materials, we'll, of course, be running the statistics on it, do the statistical analysis, and opening, handing it off to our academics, our team academics, to begin writing the papers of our findings on it. So, and then we'll, once we have that, just keep adding as we go along until we have a meta data and we really have accumulated the largest data set possible to help us understand what this phenomenon is, or was.
Just getting to those numbers is going to be really exciting for people. I know we talked a few months ago with your coworker, Michael Kelly, who has been sort of like dabbling in some of those percentages. Great guy. And people found it really, really interesting. Just when you put this stuff in bar graph form and you're looking at like shapes of beings and form factors of craft, or, things people were experiencing, but in number form, there's something really powerful about that, which is it's kind of funny in a way.
I agree. I also think it's strong. I also think it's important that we need to get past the hand waviness of all of this. People throw out numbers all of the time about how many abductees there were or how many experiencers there are, and we really, at least for the abduction phenomenon in specific, we there is some hard data that we can get there that describes, what the timeline was, like when did people start reporting it, when did it sort of precipitously drop off the cliff. I predict that and I'm open to being wrong, but I suspect we're going to find that the greatest number of these reports dropped off at the turn of the century. And that is, a data set in and of itself. Obviously there's going to, most likely be demonstrated a discrete, campaign or event of some kind. So what does that help us understand what it's about?
Maybe the NHI didn't prepare for Y2K. It's possible.
That is funny. No one has ever said that to me before, that you get points for the originality.
Thank you. Their systems went down, the whole thing ground to a halt.
And they were completely unprepared. Yeah. So, there's all the discussion of the hybrids, the mentions over and over again of hybrids in these materials. So that's clearly a part of what's going on. So I just, I want to get the data set out there. And I think the experiencer community wants the data set out there. We are this marginalized, community that has been waiting in the wings for the better part of a few decades, and it's at some moments exhausting, it's exasperating, it's demoralizing, it's infuriating, it's irritating. It's like, wait a minute, we're all telling the truth to the best of our ability. And I'm sure it feels a little bit like, the meteorites, it's falling in France, when peasants were seeing them back in the day. I forget how many hundreds of years ago that was. And it's, this community of individuals that's just summarily dismissed because, that everybody knows fiery rocks don't fall from the sky. And it's very frustrating to be a sane human being, to have had an encounter that is legitimate and real. And even if it's in a partly real way as we understand it and a really weird way that we don't understand, like all of that's, a part of the narrative, and we need to understand it. So I'm doing my best. Our team is doing our best to try to platform this whole community so that we have, through this metadata project, a talking point. We have a transducer, a way to connect with academia and science and the general mainstream public or policymakers about this, So we'll see.
I can't imagine how frustrating it must have been for all these years to be not taken seriously about something that was so profoundly important and revelatory for you. And I'm sure you've shared this experience with dozens, maybe hundreds of people over the years. Are you in contact with some other experiencers now, or like abduction experiences being encountered?
Yeah. I'm connected to the experiencer, community in several different ways. So, connected with the folks in the experiencer network and the Reddit community, and connected with other people that come through either Archives of the Impossible or the John Mack Institute. It's not like we don't have the gang back together as we did, 30 years ago. I think many of the abductees who went through those encounters have all just had to get on with their lives, that the encounters disrupted as they disrupted, and we were forced to, metabolize that to the best of our ability and find a new internal balance and, go, okay, this is what happened. And I think a lot of us just assumed that that disclosure was not an option. Like that was not something we were going to get to witness or participate in our lifetime. And I certainly assumed, that, after kind of I would call it a failure, to make any headway in the mainstream conversation, when John was alive, I just assumed that I was taking this to my grave. So and I think a lot of people in this community were. So there's surprise, I think, for some of us who are finding ourselves here. I think those of us who went through these encounters back then, I can't speak for everybody. There's a feeling of, I'll speak for me personally. I can't speak for the whole community. I'll speak for myself. I'm letting it unfold as it unfolds. I'm not hoping for anything in particular to come out of it. I think that all of the work that I'm personally involved in, that other people that I know are involved in this space we're just doing the good work because we feel compelled to do it. And there's a lot of good people in this community and a number of different organizations and ways that are just showing up it's, in a kind of a salmon going upstream kind of way. We just know that we need to do this. And it feels like we're on the precipice of something. And the precipice may or may not look like official disclosure in the way that we imagine it or might want it. It may be that we're on the precipice of a grassroots, social movement that is taking action, putting into action what experiencers and abductees have learned from our encounters, which is sort of a stepping away from like, that doesn't work. There's nothing inspiring in that. What does it look like to be co-creative together and create a new way of being human together? So that's where I feel like there's some active charge in the community, but we'll see. We'll see.
Interesting. Yeah, I like the invocation of the concept of activism there. It kind of gradually dawned on me that is the core of UFO work after like about 2 years thinking about it. It's not like a media opportunity. It's like a conversation project that we're all contributing to in whatever way we can.
Exactly.
Mine is pretty slight compared to yours. But while we're still near the nerd stuff a little bit, can I ask you a couple more questions about the archives?
Sure.
Okay, cool. I'm really excited to hear that you said the digitization is done on at least some chunk of this. Is that, am I right in thinking that's probably the Mack and Strieber files that you have completed digitizing? Okay,
Correct.
Cool. So for my understanding of the project, does that mean you've still got a bunch of valet stuff in boxes? And then do you have any other collection, any smaller collections from other researchers? You mentioned Ed May. I'm not familiar with that person.
Yeah, we do. So all of the other collections are not digitized. I'm sure we have some digitized materials in some of the other collections. Again, all of the donors for the collections that we have maintain copyright. So we have to and want to honor their wishes around these materials. So I think over the course of the next 20 to 50 years, eventually all of these materials will be digitized and available to the public. Many of the physical materials are available to the public now. So if somebody wants to come in and look at the EdMay materials or the DeCanes materials, they can set an appointment in advance with the Woodson Research Center and let them know what boxes they'd want to look at, and they'll be, we'll pull them for them in advance so they can come in and spend time with them. The Jacques Vallée materials are not available to the public yet. I think they're going to be incrementally come available. I think the first set of boxes will be available next year, if I'm correct. So I expect that we'll have some level of public interest in that. But the most, I think, compelling boxes potentially from Jacques' collection are years away still from being available. And I think that's on purpose. So this is going to, how we begin to make all of this available is going to be an ongoing effort, and our systems around it will continue to evolve. I think the most important deliverable that we're trying to create, other than the data set itself, out of the metadata project, is this end user experience, an AI driven interface that allows researchers and the general public to dynamically engage the content of these materials, run their own, if somebody, their own search. If somebody wants to come in and know, well, how many people saw gray aliens with big black eyes, or, they can look for all of the materials that we have in there, through that experience. And then there will be some documents that we are going to make available, as PDFs as well. So somebody wants to look at the drawings that are available. We're working right now on what platform we're going to use to allow people to see drawings and then see a letter that's associated with that drawing. We're really doing our best to, as quickly as possible, prepare all of these materials so they're accessible to the public in a really easy way.
That sounds so cool. It also sounds like you're describing something deeper than just a spreadsheet. Like this is a computing environment with interactive capabilities that you're building gradually. I want to make sure I understand. So we've kind of got Mack and Streber at the top in terms of like digitized, most accessible, but there's still privacy stuff in there. That doesn't mean everybody could just go read them. Then Ed May and Dick Haynes are also in the mix, and they're not digitized, but you could reserve like time to look at them physically. Then Jacques Vallée, some of that stuff will be physically available sometime soon, but it'll be a slow roll. And those three collections, May, Haynes, and Vallée, might eventually move into the digitization pipeline.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. We have 18 collections or 19 collections total right now. If people want to know what collections we have, there's a link, and if I was a little bit more prepared, I would have had that just here and dropped it into the comments. But
if I would have been more prepared, I would have known that. So I will find the link.
So we're both learning something here, right? So if they go to the Center for the Impossible webpage in the Woodson Research, if they click, type in Center for the Impossible, Fondren Library at the Rice University website.
Okay.
They will be taken to a page that gives people the opportunity to see all of the collections that we have and a summary of them. So they can click on each collection individually and then see a drop down, like these are all the boxes and the subject matter that's included. So
cool.
That's already there because, these archives get processed. That's just the Fondren Library or the Woodson Research Center within Fondren doing what it does in terms of archival preservation. So that's already there. They can see. And there will be certain documents or collections or pieces of collections that are just not available to the public right now. And there will, like, withheld is the word that's used for it. And they'll see a withheld note on it. So if that's there, then they don't have access to that. Right now, the John Mack materials are still withheld from the public, all of them, simply because we're in the process of processing them. And I think that by sometime next year, I'm hoping by summer, we will certainly have the correspondence, files when there's some cool letter exchanges, between John and other intellectual, peers who were thinking on this phenomenon or warning him against being involved with it or whatever. So there's some fun stuff there that people will appreciate looking at. We're going to make the letters available as soon as we have them anonymized. So with the PIIs out, then we can do that. Like I said, the research materials are in behind a vault, behind a vault door for now, and will be for the rest of my lifetime.
Small question, but the transcriptions of these interviews are all textual, right? Is there any like audio recording or video recording?
There are. The short answer is everything.
Wow.
So, all of the transcribing we're doing right now is textual, but that's for the John Mack materials in specific. We owe that. What would I say? That's the readiness of those materials to Will Boucher, who has served in a role as the in-house archivist for the John Mack Institute since John was alive, effectively. So he started out as one of the original transcribers. So he's been associated with the John Mack legacy for the better part of 30 years. So even before it was a legacy. So to his credit, God bless him, over the years, every tape that existed was transcribed and digitized. So we have transcriptions of all of our Betacam tapes and all of the little, I don't even know what you call them, the little micro cassette tapes from back in the day as well. So
so the tapes exist. Yeah, that's very impressive. Also, those
it's a massive amount of material. It's like if people understood like how many thousands of hours went into doing that, and we have one man to thank for it. Really,
wow, way to go. So the recordings exist in physical materials, but there's no digitized recording collection as of yet. Is that right?
So there are. So I'm just trying to think. It depends on the collection that we're talking about. So we have the Betacam, for instance, aerial phenomenon tapes are in this collection here, right? So because we're the official owners of those materials. So we have the master tapes, which are just tape, right? But we also, in the past few years, had those tapes digitized. So we have created a textual transcript of those digitized tapes, but we have the digitization of them.
Cool.
We do have transcripts of all, because that had to happen way in the beginning anyway, of all of the sessions, the experiencer sessions.
Wow, that's so
because
much
it used
work.
to be back in the day. Yeah, it is. Back in the day, it was literally transcribers like listening and typing as they were listening, like super old school. So we have all of that. So we have the tapes and the transcriptions.
Wow, that's amazing. I guess one more question in this space is that there must be a challenge to incorporating different elements of data. Like I would imagine when you get to some of the valet stuff, a bunch of it will be about craft, like it made the following indents on the lawn, or like people saw this kind of ship, and incorporating that into the same collection that's like a letter to Whitley Strieber about like somebody meeting an owl, that talked to them or something. Like the challenge of that is significant, and I wonder what kind of structures that implies in terms of your work. Like, is your vision to put everything in the same kind of like interactive basket of accessible material, or like, do you think there are different databases that want to emerge about different aspects of the phenomenon?
Yes, all of the above.
Okay.
So the idea for how we're doing this is that we will definitely in our databases create them so that each of the collections are discrete, but also so that as somebody comes in and wants to know about a certain subject, in it, or they're studying it, from a specific, I would say, a specific perspective, then they could come in and say, all right, from all of the collections, tell me how many times this, showed up, or this repeated.
Owls, yeah, sure.
Yeah, whatever. And then it could look at all of the collections and say, this is how many mentions we have of it. Right. So
Cool.
you can imagine, and that's speaking of owls, Mike Clellan, donated his materials to us as well. So
cool.
There's a lot of owl stuff there. And obviously, and it's going to take time. Like when people ask, well, when are you going to be done? I think done is maybe a bit of an illusion, or there's a horizon that keeps moving out. It depends on what we define as done. We'll have the pilot study with the Strieber and Mack materials done, sometime within, I think, the next couple of years. And if we can move this AI process that we're in right now faster than what I imagined, maybe it's done, by the end of next year, or the beginning of 2027. I think that's ambitious. I think we're closer to probably the end of 27. But point being is that we get that done, and then there's more. It's like, okay, how do we digitize more? And then where do we need to do the transcription and the anonymization? How do we it's like rinse, repeat, as we just keep growing this database of material from all of these different researchers. So, I mean, I see 7 to 10 years in my head, forward. Like, I think this could go on for a while. I do feel like we'll reach a saturation point at some point, because the researchers who looked at especially the end of the 20th century phenomenon will not be here anymore. I mean, we're all aging out. I'm going to age out at some point, assuming I live a long life. Jeff, same thing. Like we talked about earlier, we're trying to figure out how to, hand this off to the next generation, and that's what we're doing with this. It's like it is the handoff, and like, okay, here's the historical archives. Now we'll see how that continues to inform the conversation that occurs even long after we're gone.
Yeah, and you're building a structure and a system into which new data can flow because you've developed this highway onto which it can drive and then arrive at an unpacking facility at the end where everybody can access it. I guess something that people would be curious about, so I should just try to ask is, do you have kind of like a loose impression of some of the numbers that we're talking about, like in terms of being encounters? Can we ballpark some of the like reports of people encountering beings? Are we talking like over under 10,000? When we talk about like abduction experiences, is it like over under 100? Can you help us with some of that landscape?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons I'm keen to do this is because I think the numbers are more modest, at least specifically about the abduction phenomenon. I'm not saying like the word experiencer has, mutated to include all manner of psi phenomena and various different kinds of encounters, whether it's apparitions or OBEs and NDEs or telepathy. So allowing all of that to exist in the space, if we're just like for the moment focusing on the abduction phenomenon, that like we were saying earlier, tends to be more isolated to this discrete period of time at the end of the 20th century, and those numbers are a lot more down to earth. They're John. We're somewhere around 300 case studies with John. Like people that were involved in his research. That doesn't mean there were only 300 people who had these encounters. It's just 300 people who made it through this screening process, and they determined that they were good candidates for it. The letters we have from Whitley himself says there were over 100,000 letters, over the course of time that he received. We have at the moment like 3,800 or something like that, around there. I know that in total, between the John Mack and the Whitley Strieber files, we have 7,771 documents that represent presumably discrete narratives of some sort. And that's not including the experiencer materials, right? So if we put all of those numbers together, plus some other data, obviously, that we haven't included, I think at the moment we have between 10 and 20,000 individuals who are represented, but that's not including any of the other researchers' materials who are coming in. Like if we think about Kathleen Martin's materials, or, any like Barbara Lamb or Linda Moulton Howe, and not that they're, we have any agreements with them, right now. I hope to. It'd be great to have their materials. Would love to host them here. But, if we start putting their numbers together, and if we are able to have digital access to the Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs materials, we're in a dialogue with the Philadelphia Archival Association, who's, I'm not saying the name of that institute right, but those materials are in Philadelphia right now. We're talking to them about it. So if we look at their materials and the 8 or 9 of them, then I think we could have somewhere between 100 and 200,000 cases, which is not the same as 1 million cases, right? Or millions of cases. And that hand wavy number has happened a lot over the course of time, and I think a lot of that's tied to the Roper poll that went out, many years ago. And I think a lot of people don't know what the Roper poll actually was. There's nothing, we have a copy of the questionnaire here. It's like 10 questions, and they don't do anything to really like nail down or be able to like truly identify, is this person a strong candidate for actually having had abduction encounters? So this is all of the kind of really boring, nerdy, geeky stuff, the science of the boring, as we call it, that we're trying to make.
Well, there's a thrill to the boringness, I think, because of the hand wavy space that you mentioned. It's so abstract and vague and opaque and shadowy that just
it drives me nuts. It drives me nuts. I hate it.
It's really rough. Yeah. So I'm thinking about a different meaning of the phrase strength in numbers during this conversation here. There's a power
a great point.
to simple,
I like that.
hard
I think
facts.
it's grounding, right? I think when we actually have some real data, even though we'll still get critiques about how the data was collected. I mean, we're still going to have the issue of hypnosis, or how people, what other sort of altered states of consciousness that people might have used in order
Mm-hmm.
to reclaim some of these black box memories.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what we'll understand much better through the data than we know right now is how many individuals, like myself, did not require hypnosis, that we were having, in direct contact encounters during waking state consciousness. And that really, kind of immediately blows up the counterpoint of like, well, all of this was, pulled out of people's imaginations, or they were being influenced, by the researcher they were working with. It's like, I was not being influenced by any researcher when this thing was in front of me and interacting with me about 12 inches in front of my face. So it's having those kind of details like on the record that can ground the conversation and give academics and scientists a point of entry, the gatekeepers of human knowledge, a point of entry
Mm-hmm.
into this conversation in a way that just isn't possible because of all the hand waviness right now. So I like to say, John would often say, we must give unto Caesar his due. And I think the experiencer community, has a responsibility here to collect this data in a methodologically and scholastically rigorous way, so that when we hand it over, whatever critiques there will be of it and of its provenance, at least we're having a real conversation about real numbers and qualitative data as well. So after that, I mean, who knows? Like that's the best we can do.
So moving into who knows, I think this is probably a good time to pivot into the other parts of this conversation that we mentioned we could have today. These are inherently fuzzier parts, but I'd like to do two more sort of big areas. One is, what do we think is going on? What kind of impressions can we draw from this data? Try to hold this question a little bit lightly because, as we've both discussed, clarity is important here, humility is important, curiosity, critical qualities. And then for the last part of our conversation, I'd love to get your takes a little bit on how you think we should be responding culturally now, given what we know. Like, are there some other institutions that you imagine we might need to be forming? Are there sort of like postures of intellectual openness that we need to be adopting, and maybe some like specific ways that we can all encourage that? And then for a final outro, I'd love to do a little bit of chin scratching around the potential of explicit outreach and maybe communication possibilities. But so that's the table setting for the last part of our conversation here. Step one, do you have some general impressions after having lived with this data for so long, seen some stuff yourself, experienced other people's reports? Have you sort of drawn maybe not conclusions, but some ideas about what you think the shape of the phenomenon is?
Caleb, I feel like we're in margarita territory here. Like I feel like
yes, you're
or at
right.
least a couple beers or a bottle of wine or something.
Well, we ate our vegetables with all that stuff about data.
Yes. It's way too early in the day, I know, to be thinking about such things. But these are the kind of conversations that, around a campfire at night with marshmallows and blankets and that kind of thing. All right, let's see if we can do our best to take them one at a time. I will certainly start this by saying anything that I share now is my own personal opinion. It doesn't in any way represent an objective reality about the phenomenon. I would never assume that I have awareness about what that is. I can just say, based on my own personal experiences or based on the data that we're exposed to, here's the sense that I have about it. But I feel like if there's 100% of something to be known, like whatever the objective reality is, I feel like I might know, if I'm lucky, 3%. So that puts us on, like, I want that to be very clear. I am nothing but humble in this. So even if I talk confidently in how I answer these questions, please know I know fuck all.
I really admire your humility here and your humble, intellectual, curious posture.
I think it's like, if we're being intellectually honest, like, I'm personally not comfortable asserting narratives with a kind of certainty that says, well, we know this to be true. I can still vibrate with a kind of confidence about something and still be, very willing to find out that's completely wrong. So starting from that place, ask your question again.
Sounds good. What do you think is going on?
What the hell's going on here? So
Yeah.
I think there's a number of things happening all at the same time. Everything. What is that? What was that movie? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. It has that kind of feeling to it. So I think if we're talking about the abduction phenomenon, I think largely that was directed by or managed by whatever it is, the little gray guys. Those were the things that were most often reported from those encounters. They were often seen, with Nordics, tall Nordics, or mantids, or other various kinds of non-human intelligence. Given that those varying narratives around the kind of NHIs that were described happened before there was an interwebs and before people could talk to each other easily about this, before there were a lot of books out, suggests to me that we are actually dealing with a number of different intelligences, various different kinds of species or whatever they are. So I think there's a very high probability there. And my understanding from people who have inside knowledge about the legacy programs that, we have heard Eric Davis and other people go on record saying, the number 5 around the kind of, the number of intelligences that we might be interacting with. So whatever the number is, whatever they actually are, it seems to be more than one. So, and I think in terms of their motivation, I tend to land on, if you want to know what something is, look at the fruit that falls from the tree. And I know that can be very controversial in the experiencer community to say that. There's a whole subsection of our community who's still pissed off about what happened. They can't reconcile the trauma, that feeling of loss of agency in the abduction encounters or other weird encounters that might be unwanted. I think, not everybody can either ethically get on board, like even if these guys are well-intended, it might still piss them off. Like, I didn't get permission for that. I don't care what this is about. Fuck you, I didn't give you permission. And we have to accept that as a valid way of responding to it. But I think as opposed to someone like myself who definitely had those fuck you moments, like this was, very scary to go through. I definitely have my own trauma response, ontological shock that I had to process for a number of years. But I think because John was a clinician by training, he understood how to set up a safe space for abductees to process what we went through and not get stuck, not stay there. If it resonated for us to kind of metabolize the trauma and figure out how can we be productive with it, then there was space for us to do that. So I've landed in this space over the course of 30 years of like, yep, that was scary. Like my cat doesn't like it when I drop her into a kitty carrier either, that she doesn't understand, that she hasn't given permission for. And, I take her to the vet in a weird machine that seems like magic to her. And she's in this, this weird clinical room that she didn't, consent to being in either. So like, I feel the way that she feels about that. That was weird. But if I look at the fruit that's fallen from the tree and the person that I've become on the other side of these things, then for me, this feels like this was an educational process. We were, given an opportunity to get a broader perspective of how the universe actually functions, how reality actually occurs, that the human physiology actually has the capacity and these higher and higher sort of levels of sensitivity to perceive different kinds of intelligence that is not necessarily perceptible to our 5 senses as we've known them. So I think there's an evolution of Homo sapiens that's occurring right now. And I think that the contemporary experiencer community is a reflection of that there seems to be a high a percentage or preponderance of neurodivergent individuals in this experience. The contemporary experiencer community, I think, is not an accident. I think there is a neurodivergence that's occurring that's allowing us to hear, feel, see whatever it is that, okay, we're not alone, and we may not be able to necessarily see with our eyeballs this thing that's in the room, but boy, we can feel it. Like it's clear like the hairs are crawling on our body, or our energy field, our magnetic, our EM field is letting us know that something else is with us. So I think we're in some really strange territory, and I think reality is, but whatever it is that looks like magic to us, and this is not magic. I think that there's not this other world, this third world, like, John was kind of assigned to, or aligned with this, Patrick Harper daimonic reality, explanation, that it wasn't either not real or real, which is very Kuhnian as well. Thomas Kuhn's was like, don't land anywhere. So John didn't land anywhere, or it's neither this nor that, but it's somewhere in between. And I don't think it's that woo. I think that reality is weirder than we thought. I think that there are physical beings who, a la, Mike Masters' theory, I think that maybe these gray guys are, and some of these other beings are the results of maybe millions of years of evolution, and have somehow cracked the time travel, thing in the craft that they're operating, and that's one possible answer. There could also be, extraterrestrial, ultra-terrestrial, ultra-dimensional, for lack of a better way to say that. I know the physicists like skin crawls when we talk in language like that, but come up with better words and we'll use them,
Yeah.
So for me, it all feels holistic. I don't feel like this is the world that we live in, is just this one place and there's another place nearby. What it felt like to me in being involved in these encounters is that it just sort of cracked open, everything that represents whatever it is that I am, including consciousness as foundational, not as arising from my brain, but how the consciousness interacts with my physical body, and how that physiology interacts with everything that's out there, including physical and non-physical beings. So I think it's just, we're learning something. I think this is a Copernican-esque revolution, and we're starting to understand that we don't actually know everything. And this phenomenon, such as it is, and all the ways that it shows up, is mirroring that back to us in a lot of different ways. How's that?
Wow. Yeah, great. That was a super thorough rundown.
Okay.
Something I think about a lot in this space to sort of reconcile those other spaces with this space is this the really widespread natural phenomenon of different sensory apparatus in the natural world. Like every animal on the planet perceives reality in radically different ways. And it seems to me like that's at least a possible sort of reconciliation avenue here, that there might be just aspects to reality that we're physically not equipped to understand intuitively yet, and that we haven't scientifically explored, but clearly we have some ability to interact with them. So, maybe we're just kind of at the beginning of our journey there. And as you mentioned, these other beings seem to know a little bit more about it.
I think where there's a wave coming, you mentioned science, the telepathy tapes and this, telepathy that's clearly happening with the kids on the spectrum who are otherwise, challenged to communicate. And it's, becoming clear that there's this replicatable results that demonstrate, okay, there clearly is telepathic communication, right? And anybody who has had experienced telepathy in their life already knows that. We don't need to be validated in some way by science. It's not like when science tells us, then it's true. And I think this is also what's being a little bit flipped on its head. There's a word that I'm looking for. What is it when a church, I wish there were people here to help me out, heretical. There's something heretical happening within the establishment, because so far, at least for a long time, hundreds of years, it's been science that tells us what's true. And it's science that tells us what knowledge is. That's the materialist worldview. And I think what is becoming very clearly obvious in all of these experience or narratives is that knowledge and knowing, gnosis, happens in ways that science either is not yet equipped to understand, or that just doesn't give a shit what science thinks about it, because it's happening anyway. So there's this kind of recalibration that I think is in the early stages of happening in terms of our relationship to these other ways of knowing and being and perceiving, and where science is. It's like science is going to have to catch up to this. Now, that being said, there were plenty of scientists in our community who are completely fascinated and believe or have their own personal experiences of, these other phenomena experiences, and they're keen to figure out how to integrate science into a phenomenological, study. So that's something that we're doing, at our metadata project as well, is like trying to take a scientific phenomenological approach. There's a reason we have a phenomenologist and a neuroscientist, in our team, because we want these things to integrate, and that's not easy. The epistemology of a phenomenologist is very different than the epistemology of a scientist. So it becomes very clear when one studies this why all of these different areas of human knowledge and research are done in these very siloed ways, because there are different value systems and priorities and strategies that each one of these different disciplines applies in trying to understand whatever it is they're trying to understand about, humankind and human behavior. So I think part of the chop wood, carry water, hard work of all of this is like just figuring out what it looks like to integrate, these various disciplines, to have them be not just interdisciplinary, but transdisciplinary as well. And that's, believe it or not, it's not sexy, but that's a part of the important work here. So we're trying to establish new models for that as well.
That's a really interesting point. It made me think that is the kind of thing that maybe needs to happen to embrace a truly like revolutionary overhaul of our worldview. Like the stovepiping of individual academic pursuits is fine when we're dealing with each of those individual things and just like dialing down onto greater detail. But when we have to like move the cosmos here, like rotate our vision of the sky, that's going to move every constellation. And so all the academic pursuits are going to need to recalibrate. I think you just said that really beautifully. And then I fumbled around more. But so
no, you did great. You did great. That was it. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Okay, well, so naturally flowing from that, I would love to ask what other kind of things you think should happen now. I agree with you that I think we're kind of at the beginning here, or at a turning point somewhere in a process that's onboarding more people. Process of making this show for me has been talking to a lot of scientists and just being thrilled at how many of them there are out there working on this, excited to get more information. So I sometimes grind on the why aren't we farther yet? And I am frustrated by that, but
you're adorable. Add a few decades to it and then see how.
Right. I can't even imagine. Thank you for not exploding and like shooting up a mall or something, Frank. I would have been beside myself. Okay, but so we're starting to make this progress. What other things do you think we should be doing societally and culturally? And to give you one like specific prompt, this is a little bit on the darker side, but your point about some people still being like quite upset about the abduction phenomenon totally makes sense. I wonder if you think there's anything on the order of like an international response that kind of behavior merits. Like, I've talked to one of my favorite folks in this space who you've probably met is Dr. Michael Bolander, who's kind of trying to rally international thought about this from a legal perspective, and just like prepare us to make some agreements about how we would like to be treated as a species. If our cats could raise our hands and say, "Thank you. If you zip us in the bag, can you leave some light or something?" This is a little bit broad, but do you think that there are some structures that we should do or build as a society to start encountering this? It might that you might be able to answer that question in many different ways.
Yeah, I appreciate that you brought up Michael's name and his work. We've been talking to Michael behind the scenes, and
cool.
To his credit, I really appreciate his openness to learning in this, and like he has very strong instincts, from his professional experience, obviously as a judge, and his understanding of the law and what it means to protect a human being who has been wronged in some way. So there's a lot of gravitas and life experience and professional experience that he carries with him that I just have the utmost respect for, and I encourage him, and I think he would readily agree to this. I encourage him to go slow. So when you say, what do I think is required here? I think we need to do something that human beings are, and the human brain is not very good at doing. We want answers and we don't like loose ends. It's sort of like the hallucinations that AI does. Like when you ask, like you clearly spits, it'll spit back like 90% of something that's totally right. And then 10% is just like, dude, you just totally pulled that out of your ass. And you ask AI, why did you do that? And it's like, it just really doesn't like not knowing that, not showing up and not having a narrative to spit out. So,
so it'll make something up. Yeah.
It makes something up, right? And
it'll go, great point. I did totally make that up. Here's a new thing that I also made up.
Exactly.
But also, hopping in, we have some evidence that the human brains do this. Like
that's what I'm telling you. That's a reason. That's a reason.
Okay,
why
great.
That's the analogy. Is that the human brain wants to do that, and so if like what is required here, I think it's restraint, and I think there's intellectual humility, and I think receptivity and curiosity is required. I think there's a lot of data that we need yet. There's a lot more information than what we have right now before we start reaching conclusions. I think, for me personally, I think it's too early to be thinking about what are the legal consequences of an NHI encounter, like abducting a human being. In no small part, because if it turns out, just as an example, that these gray beings, for instance, are really future humans, a la Mike Masters, theory, and they have reached the end of the evolutionary capacity or trajectory of what they can accomplish in their own bodies. They're all clones, right? So there's no vital biological life form that they can naturally reincarnate or incarnate into. And somehow they represent the end of our, like, whatever Homo sapiens becomes that far into the future. Then if we knew about that, would we not be like, okay, I agree to be a part of whatever research thing is going on, whatever DNA exchange is going on, in order to continue on our lineage, into the future in some other healthier way? I think if we understood that, and even for people who are still pissed off, rightfully pissed off about it, maybe they wouldn't be so pissed off. So part of it is just, we need more information than what we have. The problem is, given that, as I like to quote, Mike Masters saying, given that we're these drunk monkeys juggling chainsaws and we're not to be trusted, Trump is now talking about ramping up nuclear, testing again in the context of what's going on, on the global stage. It's like, we can only be trusted to handle so much information right now. So when we're talking about, like, what does disclosure look like? I'm aligned more with this idea of Carl Nell's, approach, like this, what does it look like to for a controlled process disclosure, or at least a directed, an intentional process? What is it that we're trying to get to? What do we want to understand? What information are we willing to confront right now? Because I think more than anything, we learn about the non-human intelligences that are interacting with us. There is a reconciliation that needs to happen with the human beings who have been suppressing this information for the better part of 80 years. So whether it's private contractors or, other players in the legacy programs, is clearly some behavior there, or clearly some information there that they just simply don't want people to know about right now for whatever reason. So if we talk about, well, what's the next step in front of us, I think to come to terms with our own human relationship with each other in this space. Like, what does it look like to move into a space of authenticity and honesty about what's happened, and then figure out how to, come to terms with it at a global economic level, or a socio culture, or a psychosocial, level. All of those things, they would certainly emerge out of a more intentional effort. That being said, human beings are messy. We do what we do. And we're on the bell curve of a spectrum of, like, mental health. Some people are super healthy and integrated. Other people are really distressed. And I think that we can imagine that our development and evolution in this isn't so much focused on or driven by those who are healthiest and integrated. It's really how do we take care of the people who are really distressed by this and not well or in fear. Like that's where our attention needs to be. So it's not trying to move forward while these people are suffering in some way. It's like, what do we have to do to take care of this community and prioritize their needs? As we try to figure out what the hell is actually going on here. It's a highly complex problem. There are no simple solutions to it. I think the shit's gonna hit the fan probably. Whether we want it to or not. And I think it's just a question of timing. Does it happen 2 years from now or 10? Who knows?
A really specific, straightforward action that feels right to me, I want to bounce this off you, is to create a UAP/NHI specific fund within the national science foundations of major nations who invest in science. I know most science funding tends to come from public money. There are private research operations. They often have like a commercial avenue, so they want to keep information proprietary. But I spoke to a physicist about this who said, look, I can't even apply for a grant to work on this because there is no category within the National Science Foundation that says we have X amount of dollars for UAP NHI research. So that feels like a really concrete next step that we could encourage our friends in the scientific community to lobby for, because that community is porous with the government science agencies, like specifically the National Science Foundation in America. Does that seem right to you as like
it's a chicken and an egg? It's a chicken and an egg challenge. I mean, you're talking about old establishment and whether or not the old establishment is equipped to herald in or midwife in this new understanding of the universe. And I would argue that it's a very difficult ask, because the new understanding is going to require at the physics level as well as I don't know, I'm thinking like three different things across the cut. If we talk about global governance and we talk about intellectual institutions, academic and scientific institutions, trying to, and again, global economic, policy and realities, and again, sociocultural realities, how much of the existing framework and, dominant worldview is ready to accommodate what this phenomenon asks of us. And I would argue that not much of it, right? So it's late in stage capitalism, which is driving so much of the things that are problematic in this world. And I'm not talking about a healthy capitalist economy. I'm talking about the kind of imbalance that we have right now. And that, even though that's, talking about in stage capitalism seems maybe a non sequitur to your question, it's actually directly related. People get, scientists and academics get funded for particular reasons that advance, very often their professional careers. And, schools, universities don't want to fund projects that would somehow undermine their standing. Most scientists and academics are still like on the outside of this conversation, not on the inside of it. They're not going to want to do things that jeopardize their, earning potential or their tenure or the potential of getting tenure. So it's like we just have all of these old systems that are resistant to this kind of new information. So what does it look like for those old systems to give way to something new? I really don't know. I think, we'll certainly coming at it from one arm, which is like, okay, we try to make change within the existing system. I understand from many of my academic colleagues that that's actually happening, that even in the past few years, that it's not necessarily professional suicide for an academic to be talking about this or expressing interest in it. That's a huge leap. It used to be back in the day, John was one of the only ones, out and willing to be courageous and speak about this in public. And we knew numerous Harvard colleagues who are interested in it, and we're absolutely like, do not let anybody know that I am interested in this and talking to you about this behind the scenes. That's how bad it was. So in 30 years' time, even though it's slow, it's painfully slow, we have come, there is progress. I just have this sense that the main shift is going to be ground up. I think that there are enough people suffering in the world due to the socioeconomic imbalances globally. This is why we're seeing, I think, this rise of populist movements everywhere, because most human beings are not they're not well. The well-being of humankind is very low for the majority of people on this planet. And that's not sustainable. So I think that all of this phenomenon, knowledge and knowing, and what's the word I'm looking for? This emergence of this what we're learning about the phenomenon, that it is adjacent to this moment when humankind is collapsing. Human societies are collapsing in various different ways. I don't think that's disconnected. I think we're going to see, if we get 20, 30, 40, 50 years in the future and look backwards, we're going to see this as a vanguard, as this kind of pivotal moment where there's a shift, and we either shift and head in a right direction, or we fail to make the shift and we suffer the consequences of that. So, and maybe it's a little bit of both. I don't know.
I like your broad vision there, and I also appreciate your chicken and the egg point. I think it's well taken. There's a challenge in getting more research funding if we don't have enough evidence or data to really argue that funding is necessary. So taking that as a springboard into our final question, this can be kind of like a cherry on top. Something I've been thinking a lot about for no particularly great reason is a moment of public contact, because that would, I think, be the egg that hatches scientific chickens forever. Like if we had a moment that led to a sort of collective eyebrow raise, oh, really? That could be the beginning of a new relationship academically worldwide to this topic. So my question is loosely, how would you think that could go well? And like, what do you think we would want to try for in a moment of public contact?
All right. Two thoughts. Can I just go back one, though? I just want to say something to what you just said at the very end. One of the because I'm about you. What are pragmatic steps that we can take to help, even within the old system? Like, how do we help move this along? I think increasingly there are UAP organizations that are understanding the importance of getting endowments, establishing endowments. Like, for GEMI, we have in our near long-term vision, like within the next 5 years, we'd like to have 5 million, sitting, in a fund that we can use to fund the kind of research that you're talking about. So when academics can't get funded, through, normal scientific, grant channels, then they have alternative resources. So if there are super wealthy people, out there listening, are wealthy enough that they can make a difference, finding an organization that they connect with that, has proven leadership in this field and is indicating that we want to be helpful to academics and scientists, as both the John Mack Institute and Center for the Impossible are committed to doing. Funding organizations like SOL and MPI Disclosure Fund, and other ones. I mean, there's a whole list of them out there.
SUAPS and SCU also are on my short list.
Exactly. Those are the other two. Exactly. So there are a number of different organizations. We're not perfect. We're all full of people. It's kind of we're all doing the best we can with limited resources. But to the extent that there is an opportunity to park money at an institution that can serve as an endowment, which is also is tax deductible for someone, that can help support in really practical and meaningful ways that kind of research. So I just
that's a really good point.
All right. So
great call. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Then answering your question.
What would it look like for public first contact to go well?
I don't know. I mean, if you just take the United States current, reality, societal reality, where if you take a poll of most individuals right now, we're so bifurcated in our value system here that most people feel like um, it's not like we're beyond repair in terms of like finding unification. So, like, if we just accept the reality, even in our own country, right, of how polarized we are in our value system and the way that we think about, feel about, or approach our own instincts for evolution. I suspect that there isn't one good way for
Hmm.
this to happen, because
Hmm.
like, let's say they landed somewhere public, we'll say not on the White House lawn, let's
Hmm.
just landed in the middle of or did a big display over you know um what's the park in New York City,
Central Park. Yeah, that's
Central
exactly
Park,
where my head went
Central.
to. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, let's say Central Park in New York City, or one of the the big parks in the major world, major cities across the world. So let's think
Hmm.
globally about this, right? What, like, where do people go with it? Because there's going to be some 50% or whatever the percentages of folks that think it's exciting, like, oh, this
Hmm.
is really cool, and then there's going to be a whole other percentage of folks who think that this is the devil, or think
Mm.
that they're demons or something really bad is happening. And I think, and I can, like, my heart gets sad over this. Like, I can almost feel myself getting a little bit teary. Like, there's a truth about the reality of the situation that we're in that is heartbreaking.
Hmm.
That we really have in Homo sapiens a broad disparity of consciousness and how brains function.
Hmm.
Some people's brains are wired for fear in a way that other people's brains are not. When they new things happen and they get excited about that. Some people want to jump out of an airplane. They think that's great. My husband, still does that and loves it. He's been doing it for 30 plus years.
Nice.
Other people say, not on my life would I even put my toes up to the edge of an aircraft to stick my head out of it. Like, that's just no effing way, right? So I don't think it's pretty, Caleb. I
Mm.
think whatever happens, it's not pretty, which is why I go, going all the way back to, either the middle or the beginning of the conversation. This is the Michael Bollinger piece of it. My feeling is, whatever it is that we need to do, we need to move slowly. And we may not have that luxury. It may be that for people who are really wanting to force disclosure to happen right away, or whistleblower comes out and it all just comes out overnight, and then we have the catastrophic disclosure moment that Carl is trying to, and others are trying to avoid. So I don't know. It's the question is may not be the right question. Like,
Hmm.
I think it's probably unrealistic in some way. The better question is, how do we get present?
Hmm.
How do we get present with ourselves as human beings, with other human beings, and recognize that more than anything else right now, before this is a story about quote unquote aliens, it's a story about us, right? And it's a story about how we other people, and what does it take to stop othering others, and what does it take to recognize in everybody the ourselves, right? And to, what does it look like to clean up our own front and backyard? And I suspect, my instinct is that the reason these beings keep hanging out at a safe distance is because they recognize we're in this critical moment of our evolution, that either we're
Hmm.
going to figure this out and figure out how to get functional in some way that better prepares us to be asking that question, like, okay, we figured out the hard part here. We know how to take care of each other. We prioritize cooperation over pathological competitiveness, and prioritize kindness and compassion over sociopathy and narcissism. That elevates just a handful of few people. So if we can get past that choke point, then I think that's a good moment for that question. At the moment, I feel like the wisest thing we could do, the most helpful thing we could do is look in the mirror.
Cool. Okay. Thank you for landing on that humanist optimism. I think we can do that. I'm really grateful for you sharing your time with us today. I know I got to let you go, so I just want to say thank you again and congratulations on your ongoing work. We're all super excited to see what you keep coming up with. And I think you're just like right in the center of a fascinating moment for history. So thank you for contributing and helping enlighten us all.
Thank you, Caleb. I want to pull the rug out from under you for just a second. I appreciate your enthusiasm. Okay. That was a really quick way to wrap up, and I appreciate your sensitivity to my time. But the microphone has been pointed in my direction all of this time. Oh. I'm curious about you as a young person coming into this generation after me. What do you feel in your heart is either your calling to this, or what do you feel is needed here in all of this?
Curiosity, clarity, I think, are my favorite words here. Humility is really important to me too. I would say I'm not technically a young person. I am a very curious person, and my gold standard is actually probably not disclosure. It's like collective curiosity about this subject. I want us to get to a point where our academic apparatus is aimed at it and asking interesting questions in the same way we ask questions about photons. Like, this is a phenomenon that is interesting, and we all want to just learn more about it. So I'm hoping that we can turn that corner. I am excited to be a part of that conversation, and I'm fascinated about the like road opening moment in human future here. I think this is this could be the beginning of a radically new phase of civilizational consciousness.
I love that. I love that. I think I love that answer. And I think if you put that answer, that enthusiasm, this is why the younger generations matter. Wait till you're 60 and then you'll realize that where you are right now feels young. So I think bringing in that curiosity and that energy, that's what's required now. I think everything you just said is exactly the right approach. And I think so coming from this, mature, the older person's perspective, it's taking all of that and bringing this wisdom into it. So how do we, it's like driving a clutch, right? It's like driving a standard shift car. It's like, what is the appropriate sort of shift ratio of like being slow to take this all in while you're also bringing, this curiosity into the mix, right? So there's a mixture that has to, happen so we get that right entry into it. But I love that. I think curiosity, yes, let's be curious. Let's not move forward in fear. Let's move forward with curiosity and with patience. Let's not land, right? We don't know what we don't know, and telling stories and aligning ourselves with stories is, from a scientific point of view or an ontological point of view, it's not helpful. Stories are okay within the community. Let's let the community talk about whatever they want to talk about. That's great. That's important that we're supportive of each other in that way. But if we're talking about scientific, knowledge and trying to expand what we actually know about the universe and how it's functioning and what we understand about this phenomenon, curiosity, not being afraid of the new, while also, taking time to land, I think is a perfect approach. So thank you for sharing that with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. The image I'm taking there from you, there is a smooth acceleration.
Yes.
That feels really right to me, really positive.
Yes. Yeah, I like that. That's perfect. Okay, now I'm happy.
Thank you so much for your time, Karin. It was awesome to get to speak to you. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much. I look forward to connecting with you again in the future.
And that's the show. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying it, please like and subscribe and share this with people who you think might like it. You could also directly support us at patreon.com/WTUFO for $1 a month. We do some chatting in there, and you can propose questions for future episodes. You could also check out spacefair.etsy.com. That's our company's main merch site where you could support us commercially and pick up some cool gear. Thank you again for listening. Hope you have a lovely day.